the world had always felt like a warm, safe place for Sarah, a place where everything made sense. But one Tuesday morning, everything changed. A tiny little stick, no bigger than her finger, held a secret that flipped her whole world upside down. Two pink lines stared back at her, screaming a truth she wasn't ready for. She was going to have a baby. At first, a strange flutter of excitement bloomed in her chest, like a tiny bird trying to take flight. A baby. Her baby. But the joy quickly faded, replaced by a heavy, cold feeling of being utterly alone. Her heart, which usually beat with, "Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video." And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. The loneliness clung to Sarah like a damp, heavy blanket. Her family, when she finally found the courage to tell them, didn't understand. Their worried faces and hushed tones only made her feel more isolated, as if she had done something terribly wrong. And the baby's father? He was gone, a ghost of a memory, leaving her to face this enormous change all by herself. Each passing with a heavy heart and a mind swirling with unanswered questions. Sarah knew she couldn't stay. The small town that had once felt like home now felt like a cage, its familiar streets and faces only reminding her of her troubles. So, one quiet morning, before the sun had fully woken, she packed a small bag with a few clothes, a toothbrush, and the last bit of money she had. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah had been driving for hours, the hum of the engine a constant companion against the quiet hum of her worries. Fields turned into forests, and busy roads gave way to narrow, winding paths, where tall trees stood like silent guards. Each mile took her further from the familiar, but it didn't bring her any closer to peace. Instead, a new kind of worry began to creep in. Where would she sleep? Her eyes, heavy with tiredness, scanned the darkening landscape. The thought of sleeping in her small, old car, parked on the side of a lonely road, made a shiver run down her spine. The air was growing colder, and a gentle breeze whispered through the trees, making them sway like dancers. She felt the rumble of her stomach, reminding her she hadn't eaten much all day. A deep sigh escaped her lips, carrying all the weariness she felt. Just as a knot of panic began to tighten in her chest, a faint shape caught her eye far in the distance. At first, it was just a dark smudge against the fading light, almost hidden by the dense line of trees. She blinked, trying to clear the fog from her tired mind, and steered the car slowly down a barely visible dirt track that seemed to lead towards it. As she got closer, the smudge began to take shape. It was a small cabin, old and worn, tucked away amongst the towering pines. It looked like something from a storybook, forgotten by time. No lights shone from its windows, and there were no other signs of people around, making it seem truly deserted. A sense of quiet calm, like a soft whisper, seemed to come from the little house. "A cabin," she murmured to herself, her voice raspy from disuse. Hope, a feeling she hadn't felt in days, flickered inside her. It looked simple, maybe even a little broken down, but it also looked solid and safe. It wasn't a fancy hotel or a cozy bed and breakfast, but right now, it looked like a haven. A place just for tonight, where she might be able to rest her tired body and her troubled mind. It felt like a small answer to her quiet prayers. She pulled the car off the track, parking it carefully behind a cluster of bushes, hoping it wouldn't be seen, and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deep and comforting. The engine's last cough faded, leaving only the soft whisper of the wind through the pines. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The cabin, a dark shape against the fading twilight, looked both inviting and a little bit spooky. She grabbed her small bag from the back seat, the weight of it a familiar comfort, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The ground beneath her feet was covered in dry leaves and pine needles, crunching softly with each step she took. She walked slowly, her eyes fixed on the cabin, like a small deer approaching something unknown. The path to the cabin was overgrown, with tall grass tickling her ankles and low branches reaching out like sleepy arms. It was clear no one had tended to this place in a long time. As she got closer, she could see the cabin better. It was made of rough-hewn logs, dark with age, but they looked strong and steady. The roof was covered in moss, like a green blanket, and a small stone chimney stood proudly on one side. The windows, though dusty and streaked, weren't broken, which was a good sign. It seemed to have weathered many seasons, standing firm against the elements. A little porch, with a wobbly-looking step, stretched across the front. Sarah noticed that the front door, made of thick, dark wood, wasn't fully closed. It was pushed open just a tiny bit, leaving a narrow, dark crack. It looked as if someone had just stepped out for a moment and might come back any second. This made a new wave of worry wash over her. Was someone inside? Or had someone left it open a long time ago? She stood still for a moment, listening. Only the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl broke the silence. No voices, no footsteps. After a moment of quiet listening, with no sounds but the wind and the hooting owl, Sarah gathered her courage. Her heart still beat a little fast, but the chill of the evening and the promise of a roof over her head pushed her forward. She reached out a trembling hand and gently pushed the heavy wooden door further open. It didn't creak or groan, but swung inward with a soft sigh, as if it had been waiting for her. A wave of cool, stale air greeted her. It smelled of old wood, damp earth, and something else she couldn't quite place. A faint, sweet scent, like dried flowers. The inside was dim, with only a sliver of twilight peeking through the dusty windows and the open doorway. Long shadows stretched across the floor, making everything look a little mysterious. "Hello?" Sarah called out softly, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet space. Her voice sounded small and shaky, swallowed by the stillness. She waited, holding her breath, listening for any sign of a reply. But there was nothing. Only the echo of her own nervous heartbeat. Slowly, carefully, she stepped across the threshold, her old sneakers making a soft scuff on the wooden floor. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the low light. Dust motes danced in the faint beams of light, like tiny, twinkling stars. A thick layer of dust covered everything. The rough wooden table in the middle of the room, the two simple chairs tucked underneath, and a small, unmade bed pushed against one wall. Spiderwebs, delicate as lace, hung from the corners of the ceiling. It looked like a place that had been forgotten for a very long time, confirming her idea that it was deserted. But then, as her gaze swept across the room, something stopped her cold. It wasn't completely empty. In one corner, bathed in the softest glow of the dying light, stood something that didn't quite fit with the dusty, forgotten feel of the rest of the cabin. It was small, and very clearly, not just another piece of old furniture. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes widened, fixed on the corner. It wasn't a forgotten tool or a stack of old books. It was a cradle. A small wooden cradle, carefully crafted, looking as if someone had spent a lot of time making it with love. The wood was smooth and polished, a warm, reddish-brown color that stood out against the dull, dusty floor. It had tiny little rockers on the bottom, as if it was ready to be gently swayed back and forth. What truly surprised her, though, was the blanket. It was a soft, cream-colored blanket, folded neatly inside the cradle. Unlike everything else in the cabin, it wasn't covered in dust. It looked clean, almost new, as if it had just been washed and placed there. A faint, sweet smell like baby powder and sunshine seemed to come from it, a smell that made Sarah's own heart ache with a strange mix of sadness and longing. She took a slow, shaky step closer, then another. The sight of the cradle, so unexpected in this lonely place, made her forget her tiredness, her hunger, and even her fear. As Sarah stood mesmerized by the cradle, her gaze drifted to a small, rough-hewn shelf fastened to the wall right above it. On the shelf, tucked carefully into a corner, were two more items that seemed to belong to a different time, yet felt strangely connected to the present moment. One was a book, but not like any book she owned. It was a journal, its cover made of thick, dark leather that was soft and worn from many hands holding it. The edges of its pages were a little frayed, and the spine had creases that showed it had been opened and read countless times. It looked old, very old, but also cherished. Beside the journal lay a small photograph. It was old too, faded to soft sepia tones, almost like a ghost of a memory. The picture showed a woman, her face gentle and kind, with a sweet smile playing on her lips. She was holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blanket, cradling it close to her chest. The baby's eyes were closed, peaceful and new. The woman's eyes, even in the faded photo, seemed to sparkle with a deep, quiet happiness. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore a plain dress, but her smile was as bright as any star. Sarah reached out a hand, her fingers hovering over the journal and the picture. A strange pull, a silent invitation, seemed to draw her closer. Who was this woman? And why were these precious things left here, next to a baby's cradle, in a cabin that seemed otherwise forgotten? The air in the cabin, which had felt cold and still, now seemed to hum with a secret. It was as if these items held a story, a whisper from the past, waiting to be heard. Sarah's own story, her own fears and loneliness, suddenly felt less heavy. The woman in the picture, holding her baby, looked so calm, so full of love. It was a look Sarah yearned for, a feeling she hoped to find. She carefully picked up the photograph first, her thumb gently tracing the faded image of the smiling woman. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she reached for the journal. Its worn cover felt soft and smooth under her fingertips. She knew, deep in her heart, that this wasn't just any old book. It was a key, a link to the life that had once filled this quiet cabin, and perhaps a message meant just for her. With the old photograph gently placed back on the shelf, Sarah carefully picked up the worn leather journal. The cover was smooth under her fingertips, and she could feel the faint bumps of the pages inside. She found a dusty wooden stool near the cradle and sat down, letting her small bag slide to the floor beside her. The last of the daylight was fading fast, but enough soft light still streamed through the open doorway to let her see. She opened the journal to the first page. The paper was thick and yellowed with age, and the handwriting was graceful and flowing, written in faded brown ink. It started simply, with a date from many, many years ago, long before Sarah was even born. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and then she read them again, more slowly this time. A shiver ran down her spine. Not from cold, but from a strange feeling of knowing. The words on the page seemed to reach out and touch her, speaking directly to her heart. The journal began with the story of a woman named Eleanor. And just like Sarah, Eleanor had written about feeling a deep, heavy loneliness. She wrote about the shock of finding out she was going to have a baby, and how the world seemed to shrink around her. Her family, she explained, had turned their backs on her, whispering words of shame and disappointment. And the man who was supposed to be the baby's father? He had left, vanishing like smoke, leaving Eleanor all by herself to face the daunting future. Sarah's breath hitched. It was like looking into a mirror, seeing her own pain and fear reflected in words written so long ago. Eleanor's feelings were Sarah's feelings. The ache in her chest, the confusion, the feeling of being utterly abandoned. It was all there on the pages. I found this cabin, Eleanor had written, just as the autumn leaves were falling, their colors like fire against the gray sky. My heart was as heavy as the darkest cloud, and my body ached with a weariness that went deeper than just my bones. I had nowhere else to go, nowhere to lay my head, and a tiny life growing inside me that depended only on me. Sarah's eyes devoured the words, each one a thread connecting her to Eleanor across the years. Eleanor described how the cabin, despite its simple, rustic look, became her safe haven. She wrote about the quiet comfort she found within its sturdy log walls, how the silence helped her to think, to truly feel, without judgment. Here, Eleanor penned, under this roof, I began to breathe again. The fear, which had been a constant companion, slowly started to loosen its grip. I worried about everything. How I would care for a baby all by myself, how I would feed it, keep it warm, teach it right from wrong. My days were filled with questions that had no easy answers, and my nights were often sleepless, filled with the soft flutterings of the life within me. But amidst her fears, Eleanor also wrote about her hopes. She hoped her baby would be strong and healthy. She hoped to be a good mother, even without help. She hoped to find a way to make a life for them, a life filled with love and simple joys. The journal entries detailed how Eleanor started to prepare for her baby's arrival. She cleaned the dusty cabin, sweeping away the cobwebs and making it feel like a home. She described gathering soft moss and dry leaves to make a comfortable bed in the wooden cradle. She even wrote about finding old scraps of fabric and carefully sewing them into tiny clothes, each stitch a prayer for her unborn child. This cabin, Eleanor wrote with tender words, became more than just a shelter. It became a place where my spirit could mend. With each small task I completed, cleaning a window, mending a tear, preparing the cradle, I felt a little stronger. I was doing this for my baby, and that gave me a strength I never knew I had. This tiny house held my tears, but it also held my growing hope, my quiet. As Sarah turned the yellowed pages, Eleanor's story unfolded further, revealing not just her worries, but also her amazing strength. The journal entries showed how Eleanor faced many struggles in the quiet cabin. She wrote about cold nights when the wind howled like a hungry wolf outside, and how she had to gather wood from the forest to keep her little fire burning. She talked about days when food was scarce, and she had to be clever to find berries and roots that the forest offered. There were times, Eleanor wrote, when I thought my heart would break from the sheer weight of it all. I missed the warm embrace of my mother. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she turned another page, her eyes hungry for more of Eleanor's story. The journal entries grew more urgent, more filled with the anticipation of a new life. Eleanor wrote about the changing seasons, the wildflowers blooming, and the growing roundness of her belly. She talked about the baby's little kicks, which filled her with both wonder and a nervous excitement. Then came the entry Sarah was both dreading and longing to read. It was dated a brisk spring morning, just as the first birds were singing outside the cabin. "Today," Eleanor had written, her hand shaking a little on the page, "is the day." The pains began with the sunrise, gentle at first, like a soft ripple in a pond. Now they are stronger, like waves crashing on the shore. I am scared, oh, so very scared. But there is also a deep, quiet peace in my heart. I am ready. We are ready. Sarah held her breath, her own hand resting on her stomach. She could almost feel Eleanor's fear, but also her incredible courage. The next entry was shorter, written a few days later, but its words sang with a joy that leapt off the page. "He is here, my sweet, precious boy," Eleanor wrote, the ink a little darker, as if pressed with more emotion. "Born under the soft glow of the moon, right here in this cabin, with only the stars and the rustling trees as witnesses. His cry was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard, a melody that chased away all the shadows in my heart. He is perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and a heart that beats so strong." Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek as she read. Eleanor had given birth all alone in this very cabin. But her words weren't filled with sorrow or regret. Instead, they overflowed with a powerful, endless love. "When I held him for the first time," Eleanor continued, "all the loneliness, all the fear, melted away like snow in the spring sun. In his tiny face, I saw a new purpose, a reason for everything. This little cabin, which once felt like a place of hiding, now feels like the most sacred place on earth. It is where my son was born, and where I, too, was reborn as a mother. I am no longer just Eleanor. I am his mother, and that is all I need to be." A profound sense of wonder washed over Sarah. Eleanor had found not just a place to survive, but a place to thrive, to embrace her new role with a fierce, unwavering love. She hadn't been defeated by her circumstances. She had been made stronger. The image of the woman in the faded photograph, smiling with her baby, now made perfect sense. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy and a deep, fulfilling purpose. With tears still fresh on her cheeks, Sarah carefully turned to the very last page of the journal. The handwriting was just as clear, but there was a new lightness to it, a feeling of peace and hope that shone through the faded ink. This entry was dated a few weeks after the birth of Eleanor's son. "My heart is full, overflowing with love for my little one," Eleanor began. "Each day with him is a gift, a tiny miracle that shows me the world can still be beautiful. He sleeps now in the cradle, his soft breaths filling the cabin with a sound more precious than any song. I watch him, and I know that I am strong enough. We are strong enough." Sarah smiled through her tears. The image of Eleanor watching her baby, just as she herself would soon watch her own, filled her with a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "This cabin has been my sanctuary, my teacher, my quiet friend," Eleanor continued. "It held me when I was broken, and it cradled my son when he was new. But now, it is time for us to leave. The world outside still holds its challenges, I know, but I no longer face them alone. I have my baby, and he gives me the courage of a lioness." Eleanor wrote about how she had decided to seek out a new town, a place where she could start fresh, a place where her past wouldn't follow her. She spoke of her plans to find work, to build a small home, and to raise her son with all the love and strength she had. "I will carry the lessons of this cabin in my heart always," she penned. The quiet strength of the forest, the warmth of the fire, the simple joy of creating a home with my own hands. I leave this journal here, with the cradle, not as a goodbye, but as a message. A message to anyone who might someday find themselves as lost and alone as I once was. Know that you are stronger than you think. Know that love can grow even in the most unexpected places. And know that a new beginning is always possible. The final words were a blessing, a promise, and a beacon of hope. Eleanor and her healthy baby had left the cabin, stepping out into the unknown world with heads held high, ready to face whatever came next, together. The journal ended there, a complete story of struggle, survival, and ultimately, triumph. Closing the journal, Sarah held it tight against her chest. Her mind was swirling, not with confusion or a deep, shaking breath filled Sarah's lungs, then slowly left her. Her eyes, still shining with unshed tears, looked from the worn journal in her hands to the small, handmade wooden cradle in the corner. The soft, clean blanket inside seemed to glow in the fading light. Then her gaze went to the faded photograph of Eleanor and her baby, a silent testament to a journey completed. A single tear, warm and heavy, tracked a path down Sarah's cheek. Then another, and another, until her face was wet with them. But these weren't the hot, bitter tears of sadness and despair that had filled her eyes so often lately. These were different. They felt like cool rainwater washing away the dust from a long, dry season. These were tears of understanding, tears that whispered, "You are not alone." She saw her own reflection in Eleanor's story. The shock, the fear, the abandonment. But she also saw Eleanor's courage, her strength, her deep, unwavering love for her child. Eleanor had faced the very same mountains Sarah now faced, and Eleanor had climbed them, one careful step at a time, until she reached the other side, holding her precious baby. The cabin, once just a dark, unknown shape, now felt like a warm hug. It had held Eleanor's worries and her joys, and now it was holding Sarah's. The cradle wasn't just a piece of old wood. It was a symbol of new life, of hope, of the powerful connection between a mother and her child, no matter the challenges. Sarah leaned her head back against the rough log wall, still clutching the journal. A quiet sob escaped her, not from sorrow, but from a profound relief. The world hadn't shrunk around her. It had opened up. The vast, empty feeling inside her chest began to fill with something warm and bright. She thought of her own baby, growing inside her, a tiny flicker of life that would soon be a whole person. Before reading Eleanor's words, that thought had been mixed with so much fear. Now, a spark of pure, unmixed joy ignited within her. She wasn't just a frightened girl anymore. She was a mother, just like Eleanor, capable of amazing strength and boundless love. The tears kept coming, a gentle river flowing from her heart, washing away the last traces of her deepest fears. As the last of the tears dried on her cheeks, Sarah felt a change deep within her. It was like a tiny seed that had been planted, slowly pushing through the hard ground of her fears. A warmth spread through her chest, not just from the cabin's shelter, but from a newfound sense of power. Eleanor's story wasn't just a sad tale. It was a map, a guide that showed Sarah she had the strength to navigate her own journey. She looked down at her hands, still holding the journal. They didn't feel weak or trembling anymore. They felt capable. She imagined Eleanor's hands, worn from work, but strong from love, building a life for her baby. Sarah realized that she too could be that brave. She could face the whispers and the judgments, the lonely nights and the unknown future. because she wasn't truly alone. She had her baby, a precious little life depending on her, and that was enough reason to be courageous. The heavy weight that had pressed down on her heart for weeks, making every breath feel hard, began to lift. It was replaced by a quiet determination. She thought of Eleanor finding food in the forest, keeping warm, and preparing the cradle with her own hands. These were not grand, heroic acts, but they were acts of survival, acts of love, and they showed incredible strength. "I can do this," Sarah whispered into the quiet cabin, her voice still a little shaky but holding a new firmness. The words felt true, settling into her heart like warm stones. She didn't know exactly how or what the next day would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she believed it. She wouldn't just survive. She would find her way, just like Eleanor had. This cabin, this journal, this unseen connection to another mother's strength had given her a precious gift: the belief in herself. The last glow of the sunset faded, leaving the cabin in soft shadows. Sarah knew she couldn't just get back in her car and drive away. Not tonight. Not yet. This cabin, this quiet, hidden place, felt like it was meant for her, just as it had been meant for Eleanor. It wasn't just a shelter from the night. It was a sanctuary for her soul. She made a decision, a clear and steady thought that settled her heart. She would stay here for a little while, not forever, but long enough to catch her breath, to let the lessons of Eleanor's journal truly sink in. This would be her own quiet time, her own space to think and plan, just like Eleanor had done. The immediate need for sleep was strong, but so was the urge to simply be still. She carefully placed the journal back on the shelf, next to the faded photograph. Then, she walked over to the small, unmade bed that had been pushed against the wall. It was dusty and looked a little rough, but after hours of driving and days of worry, it promised a welcome rest. Before lying down, she pulled her small bag closer, taking out a warm sweater to use as a pillow. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the cool air on her face, but a growing warmth in her chest. This place would be her temporary home. She would use the quiet hours to really think about her baby, about the life she wanted to create. She would map out a path, just as Eleanor had. How would she find a job? Where would she live after this? What kind of mother did she want to be? The questions were still there, but now they didn't feel like heavy stones pulling her down. They felt like steps on a journey she was now ready to take. For the first time since she saw those 2 pink lines, Sarah felt a flicker of peace. She would rest, she would plan, and when the time was right, she would leave this cabin with the same courage and hope that Eleanor had shown. The next morning, the cabin was still bathed in quiet shadows, but Sarah felt a new energy humming inside her. After a night of surprisingly peaceful sleep, the first rays of sunlight peeking through the dusty windows felt like a gentle invitation. She sat up, stretching her tired muscles, and looked around the small room. It was still covered in a fine layer of dust, and spiderwebs still hung like forgotten decorations. But now, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt like a place waiting to be loved again. Remembering Eleanor's words about cleaning the cabin and making it a home, Sarah felt a strong urge to do the same. It was a simple task, but it felt important. It was the first step in taking care of herself and, by extension, her baby. She found an old, stiff broom leaning in a corner, its bristles worn but still useful. With a deep breath, she started to sweep the wooden floor, sending clouds of dust dancing in the sunlight. Each sweep felt like sweeping away a bit of her own worry and sadness. She cleared away the cobwebs, wiped down the small table with a damp cloth she found, and even managed to get some of the grime off the windows, letting more light stream in. The cabin slowly began to transform. As the dust settled and the light grew brighter, the rough-hewn logs seemed to warm up, and the air started to feel fresher. She found an old bucket and brought fresh water from a nearby stream, which Eleanor had mentioned in her journal as a reliable source. The simple act of carrying the water, feeling the chill of it on her hands, made her feel connected to Eleanor, to the strong women who had lived off the land before her. She even found some dry pine needles and arranged them in the old fireplace, imagining a small, crackling fire later that evening. With each small task, the cabin felt less like a forgotten place and more like a cozy nest. It was still humble, still simple, but it was becoming a place of warmth and welcome. Just like Eleanor, Sarah was making it her own, preparing it not just for herself, but for the precious new life that would soon join her. It was a quiet act of love, a hopeful beginning in a place that had witnessed another one so long ago. After a day of sweeping away dust and letting sunlight fill the cabin, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The simple acts of cleaning and preparing the space had cleared her mind as well. As evening approached, casting long, soft shadows, she lit a small fire in the old stone fireplace. The crackling flames danced, making the cabin feel truly alive and cozy. She sat on the cleaned wooden stool, looking at the cradle and the shelf above it. The journal lay there, a silent invitation. She reached for it, her fingers tracing Eleanor's graceful handwriting on the last page. A thought blossomed in her mind, clear and bright. Eleanor had left this journal as a message, a beacon of hope. It felt right, almost necessary, for Sarah to add her own story to its pages. She pulled a small pen from her bag, a simple blue pen, a small piece of her modern world in this old cabin. With a deep breath, she opened the journal to the next blank page, a fresh, untouched space waiting to hold her thoughts. The paper, though old, felt smooth and ready. She began to write, her own hand a little clumsy at first compared to Eleanor's elegant script. She wrote about the fear and loneliness that had driven her to this cabin, about the 2 pink lines that had changed everything. She wrote about her family's confusion and the silence of the baby's father. Then, she wrote about finding the cabin, about the unexpected cradle, and the powerful story of Eleanor. She poured out her feelings of connection, of realizing she wasn't alone in her struggles. "Eleanor, whoever you are," Sarah wrote, "your words have found me, and they have given me courage. You showed me that even when the world feels like it's falling apart, a new life can bloom, and a mother's love can conquer all fear." She wrote about her hopes for her own baby, a tiny person growing inside her. She hoped for health, for joy, for a life filled with love, even if it was just the 2 of them. She spoke of her dreams to find a job, to make a safe home, to be a strong and loving mother. Her words weren't perfect, but they were honest, filled with the raw emotions of her heart. As she wrote, the fire crackled softly, and the cabin felt warm, filled with the spirits of 2 women, separated by time, but connected by a shared journey. Sarah felt like she was weaving her own thread into a long, strong blanket of motherhood, adding her voice to a chorus of women who had found strength when they needed it most. This journal was now more than just Eleanor's story. It was their story, a testament to resilience and the enduring power of hope. Sarah spent 2 more days in the cabin, days filled with a quiet purpose. She continued to clean, making the small space truly shine. She gathered more firewood, ensuring the evenings were warm and bright. She walked by the stream, letting the gentle sounds of the water calm her mind. Each morning, she would sit by the fire, reading Eleanor's words again, and then adding her own thoughts, her plans, her growing hopes to the journal. The pages now held two stories, two hearts, beating across time in the same sacred space. On the third morning, a crisp, clear light filled the cabin. Sarah looked at the neatly made bed, the clean table, the small fire she had banked for the last time. She looked at the cradle, its blanket soft and inviting, and placed Eleanor's journal back on the shelf beside it, a silent promise that the stories would continue. She knew it was time to go. She picked up her small bag, which now felt lighter, not because she had less in it, but because her heart felt less heavy. She took one last look around the cabin, a place that had been a refuge, a teacher, a silent friend. It was no longer just an old, deserted house. It was a beacon of strength, a testament to motherhood, and a living memory of courage. As she stepped out into the crisp morning air, the forest seemed to hum a different tune. The trees, which had felt like silent judges just a few days ago, now stood like old, wise friends, wishing her well. She walked to her car, her steps firm and sure. The familiar feeling of loneliness was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She wasn't alone. She carried Eleanor's story in her heart, and her own baby, a tiny miracle, was growing inside her. She started the car, the engine rumbling to life, and drove away from the cabin. She didn't look back, not out of forgetfulness, but because she knew she was moving forward. The path ahead was still unknown, but it no longer felt scary. It felt like an adventure, a journey she was ready to embrace with courage and a clear heart. Sarah was a mother, strong and hopeful, ready to face the world, not alone, but with a powerful love guiding her every step.